this process started and get some kind of a framework for it. If you'd like to introduce yourselves and then in your capacity here, then you can proceed.
Start, Michelle.
Sure. I'm Michelle Brummer, resident of Lebanon County. I live in Anvil Township. I worked for the county 2005 to 2007 on the, we'll say it is still current comprehensive plan. It's not current until you replace it. My family comes from this area. My mother's side of the family is the Umbergers. The Umbergers Mill hardware store was recently sold out of the family. Sad to see, but nonetheless, that is progress for my cousin to allow him to pursue other things. My grandfather, Brummer, worked for GE Electric for a long time before his passing in the 80s. So we are rooted here. I was pleased 20 plus years ago to get a job with Gannett Flemming based in Camp Hill. Doing community planning work primarily at that time that was very well funded by Pennsylvania's Land Use Planning and Technical Assistance Program. That has evolved and become the Municipal Assistance Program today. Perhaps not as well funded as it was back then, but there was a real push to get planning into a new era from where it had been in the 70s, where it was really sort of initiated in Pennsylvania. There were amendments to the state planning code in the early 2000s that granted some new authorities and so forth, so there was a grant funding push to help communities take advantage of those. And in fact, Lebanon County did with, I think, 2 grant rounds that funded that mid-2000s comprehensive plan, along with many other state agencies, because there were lots of things changing at that time. That was the era when stormwater was really starting to become a thing in terms of we need to figure out how it all works as a system, not just assume that folks are going to take care of it on site, et cetera. So DEP had funding involved. DCNR was working on open space and greenways as a land conservation, ecological conservation, recreation kind of promotion effort. So they had funding in the state plan. I digress a little bit. There was lots of funding and agencies involved. And I have, at that time I was not living in the county, but have returned. And have kept in touch with Julie and John throughout that time, curious about how implementation was evolving and what new needs might be popping up, because a comprehensive plan doesn't serve any community forever. Times change, people change, funding changes, infrastructure changes. We weren't talking about electric vehicles at all in 2005, and I imagine your transportation folks ponder that, whether it's a daily discussion or not. Maybe not yet ready for that here in Lebanon County, but examples of technology that changes and therefore influences how we want to shape the communities and what the community should offer. So it's probably been a 3-year conversation with Julie about when an update might come and what it might look like. The state planning code has not changed. However, DCED did issue some guidance in 2012 calling for more implementable plans. All right, implementable is kind of a catchphrase in my mind, but I think what they saw, and in fact I know this because I spoke with Denny Pucco. He came and interviewed myself and others who were working for Gannett around 2010, saying all of the funding that went out under the LUPTAP program in the early 2000s funded a lot of plans. We're not sure we're seeing a lot of implementation, like lots of thinking and talking, but commitment to action was kind of weak. And they didn't see a lot of ordinance updates or new initiatives forming around that. So the staff at DCED worked on, how could they try to influence the planning process to get more results, not just a plan, but real commitment to action. So they wrote some guidance emphasizing engagement with the community, that the conditions that really define quality of life, however a community chooses to define it, are some of that is carried by the local government, but some of it is carried by partners. So bring everybody to the table to talk about all those conditions and then figure out what each of you has the authority and mission and resources to do. So engagement, getting buy-in from those agencies, just garnering in general more commitment to take action once the plan is crafted. And if you're not willing to take action, well then maybe back your plan down and make your plan true to what you can do, as opposed to making it too big and then having the perception of failure and completion, those sorts of things. So there were a number of keys that were identified there in that guidance, and that continues to be a reference for DCED. I told Julie as I walked in, I got a request for a proposal today from another municipality we have prior worked for. Ooh, they invited us back, fantastic. But there was also reference to the implementable plan, so they continue to reference that for local government. To some extent, I wonder if that is, I don't want to say it's not important for counties versus towns, cities, boroughs, townships, etc. But the services you provide and the county relationship to the comprehensive plan, you don't have exact land use control the way municipalities do. So I think it's worth sort of looking at that with a particular angle of what you have eyes on in terms of the services you provide, but then equally important, the guidance you can give to those who do have the land use controls, etc. How's that for a background? So here we are.
You may inhale now.
So heard that you are sort of interested, dipping into what could our comprehensive plan update look like. This is Keith Chase is our strategy expert, great facilitator. He and I have worked together for 20 years, and I asked him to come today to help with a kind of discussion about what kind of plan are you looking for as an outcome, and then what are the things we would need to do collectively in a service program, whether it be consultant side or county in kind, data, etc. How would all those things, what would need to happen, be included in a scope of work in order to deliver you a plan? Now, granted, we can't decide what the content is going to be in a hour, 45-minute conversation, but really big picture, sort of hot topics that you think the plan needs to address, the guidance your municipalities may need to hear. The county is given that sort of special role in the state planning code because you see activity that is happening across the borders, where an individual township or maybe a borough and its adjacent township, when they plan, they're primarily looking at their jurisdictions and maybe a little bit into the borders. The idea of being able to look at a bigger area, and it just so happens they define the county as that next biggest area. There's some responsibility there to help municipalities, like enlighten what are the issues countywide, or maybe it's a sub-region, but that they may not be cognizant of, or pressures that are coming that they may not be aware of. So there's an interesting role between sort of different levels of government that would also influence like what this plan might talk about. Any questions? Yeah. Say a little bit?
Yeah, we'll do a bit of housekeeping, then jump into it and have a conversation. And the conversation is aimed at doing something unusual, and that is we'll create kind of a brief guiding light, essentially a blueprint for the plan. It sounds like a plan for a plan, but essentially what's really important from a leadership perspective. Michelle talks about this kind of change of implementable plans. I view that as like eatable bread. You know, a plan should be implemented. There shouldn't even be a question about that, just like a loaf of bread should be eaten. So a couple of housekeeping things. We'll just get introductions real briefly of the people in the room, who they're with, and then I'll ask you a clarification question to maybe start with you, Commissioner, and we'll work our way around.
Surely. Joellen Litz, I'm a Lebanon County Commissioner, and I was here when Michelle came the last time and helped us through this. So
Thank you.
I have a
Commissioner
history.
Bob Phillips. Mike Coo.
Phillips? Okay, and we have
Jamie Waterman.
Jamie.
Chief Clerk of the County.
John Fitzke.
Jeff.
Steve Sharmani with WSB.
Alma Ferguson with WSB.
And we'll get the backbenchers here.
Sheree Brown, GIS Department of the county.
Okay.
Jamie George, Planning Department.
Susan Everly, and I'm still not sharing my coffee.
And Julie.
Yeah, Julie Shaney, Lebanon County Planning Department.
We'll come around the back.
I'm Jim Mensa with Webtown, and by the way, Chase, what is your last name?
First name's Keith, the last name's Chase.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've been getting that a lot over the years.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chase Utley changed all the dynamics with that. Yes, sir.
I'm Matt Tatham with the Lebanon Daily News.
Okay.
Laura LeBeau, WLBR in Froggy Valley Radio.
Okay, and we'll be doing some things that involve some polling of the group. So I'll rely particularly on the commissioners and staff and key stakeholders to do that, some of the polling. Again, the product that's going to emerge from this is kind of, I don't know, maybe a 2 or 3, 4-page blueprint that as the plan is developed, it's going to be a very important reference point as to what's important to leadership. And it gives us at milestones along the way something as a check. Are we developing the plan in line with what was really important to leadership? I commend you at the start because one of the other reasons these plans, many plans are not implementable, is leadership has not been involved. It's below the radar. And that occurs in all kinds of planning. Hopefully that's changing, but you're making a very strategic investment of your time today. And we're going to take somewhat of a strategic approach. It's going to be essentially the results of this are going to be somewhat of a starting point strategy. So our workshop objective is listed. There's a few times I'll refer you to the agenda and want to draw you in, jump in at any point. I've touched on our objective. That's to frame a strategy for the comprehensive plan update. What's important, what should be different, what are the key issues, and so forth. And then I've come to really like a couple of quotes, particularly when they're used together, and they're shown here. Does anyone know who Peter Drucker was?
I know that name, but I can't remember why.
He was a real, like a management guru, and management gurus are very healthy people. He lived to about 104 or so. And Warren Bennis was another strategy or management guru. And what I like about these in combination is Drucker said the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's kind of a high and lofty statement. Well, but Bennis drills down a little bit, and leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And if you were looking for a mission statement for the commissioners and other leaders, stakeholder leaders, that might be it. It's that capacity to translate the vision for Lebanon County into reality. And that's what we try to design into any plan we do, be it strategic planning, transportation planning, and love to see community comprehensive planning move more in that direction. So with that in mind, I'm going to highlight what we'll do here. Michelle has already touched on number 2, some of the requirements and potential value. If she wants to come back and highlight a few things, that would be good. But number 3 is where we're really going to involve you in the room, kind of a menu approach. We're going to start talking about what should be the strategy for this plan. And we've laid about 8 different areas. We may not take them one at a time, but I'll go through those. We'll ask the question under number 4 is, this plan will succeed if, and I might even hand out some index cards at the time. We might collect them and maybe some way designate who is part of the leadership group, who isn't, so we can distinguish some of that. But we may also ask you the hard question that's easy to ask at the outset: this plan will fail if. And that sounds like it's maybe nice on paper, but what we do with that is the success factors. We'll ask ourselves the question, well, what do we need to do to make sure those success factors are carried out? And then the failure factors, what do we do to prevent those? Kind of a risk management approach. The vision thing, as a former president once said, number 5, we are going to ask you to do a little bit of an exercise in terms of envisioning Lebanon County, and we picked somewhat arbitrarily 2035. Normally that might be done at the top, but we'd like to stimulate your thinking in some of these other areas before we get there. Talk a little bit about key stakeholders, and time permitting, we like to customize our project management approach. We won't bore you with the details as well of that. The project management is certainly something we'll work out with Julie and others, but we do like to customize that it fits with the strategy. Then we'll kind of summarize and talk about what happens next. Are we good?
May just
please jump in.
Ask for maybe a little clarification for those that aren't here, stakeholder-wise, because we are going to want buy-in from our municipal partners and so on. Just so everybody's aware, this is a preliminary conversation that we're having. We don't want to offend anybody and get off on the wrong foot by not having people think, why wasn't I invited to that meeting? So just if you could clarify this, the scope of this particular.
By all means, and that, Commissioner, that's a wonderful question, because what you're doing here is somewhat unique. I think Michelle referred to it earlier today in a discussion as kind of scoping the actual comprehensive plan, that it is pre-comprehensive plan. So this is really an informal discussion for us to be able to get to the starting line in a much better position. So you think about a track meet, you know, the runners come up to the line, they've done a lot of preparation, but the race hasn't begun. Same thing here, the planning development has not occurred yet, but we're looking for this opportunity to get input to frame it in something less than a generic way.
Yeah, we certainly respect our other stakeholders, and this will be on our website and so on. So I just wanted to make sure that that statement was out there.
It's an outstanding clarification question, indeed, it is. And we'll ask you some things about stakeholders. Michelle, did you have anything else you wanted to cover on 2? I didn't know how much 2 you covered.
Just some highlights, and this was the other sheet that Julie handed out called a value proposition for the county plan. It's a little more text heavy than I had intended, but I'll just call out a couple of highlights. The first section says, this is a policy plan. It's like, how should we be doing things? How do we want to be doing things? It's not an ordinance. Somebody can't sue you for not implementing, but I go back to, you should want to implement the things in the plan. So it's a policy plan about how to, and it's very much about quality of life, and that's the non-technical way to talk about it, whether we're talking about to and with citizens or organizations that represent different segments of your population. And there's lots of adjectives we could use, you know, about is such and such affordable, is such and such available, certain housing types, or is it sustainable? Like, and we can define a vision and goals and certain actions around those adjectives, and then the components of community and economic development, like housing, transportation, jobs, parks, etc., things like that. Under value in the planning process, we find really strong value in the planning process because you figure out what people care about, what's important to them, both what is working today, and we don't want to change or lose ground on that, as well as things that should be improved. So there can be a range of inquiry. This might come up in our next discussion. Are we looking at sort of just benchmarking current conditions? Do you want to look at best practices from other communities? Do you want to explore scenarios? If we grow change this way, what happens? If we grow change that way, what happens? So scenarios can be part of a plan, but don't have to be. Those are sort of all sort of range of inquiry options. Engagement was my next point. So you had looked ahead perhaps on that. Citizens at large, public at large, stakeholders who represent different segments of the community, municipal officials and staff who often have a handle on how development is impacting their individual municipalities. And I know some of them meet in groups and are exchanging ideas, so that can be useful. County government proper, in terms of commissioners and all of its departments and authorities and associated agencies and so forth, have views on the services that they provide. In the prior plan, we also had some engagement with state agencies because their funding was involved and there were new standards being kind of rolling out. So that can be helpful to have early conversations with them about, is this funding program expected to be available? Is anything being scaled back? Where might we think about funding opportunities? So that could be a single meeting versus, you know, an ongoing engagement sort of a thing. But that's sort of a range of engagement opportunities, and there certainly could be more. As far as the implementable plan, now under value in an adopted comprehensive plan, there are a number of elements that are listed out in the state planning code, land use, housing, plan for the economy, but that should be what you need it to be. It could just be a chapter heading. As long as you have a chapter heading that says something about land use, then it should say what Lebanon County needs it to say. There isn't prescription necessarily beneath that, so there's a lot of flexibility and discussion of what's appropriate there for any of those. Ultimately, an adopted plan can be helpful in not only your own leadership. We said we were going to do these things, we thought these would be good for the community, and therefore we're acting in this way, but also asking for external partners to help fund or take action in a particular way. This is the vision we've laid out and we agreed to. You were at the table, now it's time to take action. So it becomes a foundation then for what comes next. That's what I was going to add.
Thank you, Michelle.
I don't want to be a pain, but
Jump in at any
no,
point.
I prefer it maybe if we could get those four. We have 3 seats here, and
There?
you know, just to get so that everybody can see each other in terms of communication opportunity.
I found a better facilitator. Excellent.
Well,
Yeah. You're right.
I just, you know,
Very well.
feel like these are the experts
Yes.
in the room, so.
Thank you. It makes it easier for us. Thank you, Commissioner.
You know, just to
Yeah.
have a little better,
You're implementing already. That's a facilitator principle I often use. Make sure people are at the table. Thank you. Just a housekeeping item. Again, this is all particularly for the media, this is all pre-planning. So when we talk about elements here, it's just preliminary information. It's not the plan in any respect. So I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, those who we're going to get input from would be, of course, the commissioners and all of staff. Is that correct? And if we collect anything, I may ask the commissioners to put a C on their cards. You don't have to put your name, because we'll be able to have a little sense what we're hearing from the commissioners versus the group at large.
right, and if
So,
the media would have any questions, we would entertain those along the way. Yep.
yes, by all means, just an open forum in that way. Please feel free to do so.
And Jamie, did you have a comment?
Just put that C on there. They need
Just
the-
put the C on your.
They need the weights.
Yeah, in some cases, we'll collect that, because we are going to put together this document. It's just essentially a reference as we get started. Okay? First place I'm going to take you under number 3. While Michelle's handing some cards out, we call this plan preparation strategy, and there's a menu of items. Some will give more attention than others. A and B are really what we call sometimes force field analysis. It's what's driving change, what's constraining change. We might get into the critical outcomes and have a discussion about that. By the way, anything we've put together in this document is draft and iterative. We'll work with Julie and others, give you the chance to look at it and say, does this make sense? So you're not making firm and final commitments in any way today. What might be some of the things we can do that are innovative? Under Leadership 360, I'll come back to the point I made that leadership is often the missing ingredient in planning. Governmental leadership, private sector, education, nonprofit, faith-based. A lot of the problems we have in society today are people are operating in their silos, and the opportunity to plan and bring people together is one way to really fix problems. We will touch on implementation and maybe give a little attention to measures of success and effectiveness. Where I'd like to start is this. I would like you on one side of your card to write A and the other side B.
And
And C, put C in a circle. Put C in a circle if you're commissioners. There only should be 3 cards coming back C. And I hope you'll feel free to provide feedback verbally. If there's any hesitation on that, we will collect cards and we'll tally things. But I hope you'll share verbally. I'm going to ask you all to take a couple of minutes, and on side A, just do a brainstorm in terms of what's driving change in Lebanon County. What's really driving change? What are the forces of change? What's driving change? And then on the other side of the card, what's holding change back? And that would be, we call it barriers or constraints. Sometimes we'll call this change drivers or change constraints. So take a minute or two and make sure you know we're going to capture all of this in terms of just data to pull together this roadmap. What's driving change? And what's holding change back or constraining it? Seems so unfair to ask people to think at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon.
We didn't bring candy. What's that? We didn't bring candy.
Oh, you did?
We didn't.
Oh, you did not bring
Should
candy.
have, should have.
Raised expectations. There.
Yeah.
And as you do this too, and we talk about these have some conversation around it. You hear some things that spur other ideas, weigh in. And Michelle's going to get highlights up there in the flip charts. We'll take those with us, and I believe Steve and Alma are going to get some supporting notes. I hope so.
Putting a lot of pressure on us.
Oh, it doesn't have to be detailed notes. spot with the arrow coming into the middle.
But then I only have that much width.
That's always a nice visual. And when you share your responses, know that Michelle's not going to take them down verbatim, nor does she need to. She'll probably put bullet points with 1, 2, or 3 words. And you can keep writing. Would anyone like to just start as you continue to put ideas? What are some of the drivers of change?
Growth.
What do you say?
Not just growth, specifically industrial growth, warehouses specifically, but population. Lebanon County is now ranked number 2 in Pennsylvania in growth.
Population.
Yeah, in that area. Attractive location for distribution to reach almost 60% of the U.S. market within a day's truck drive here. 3 interstate highways that intersect Little Lebanon County, relatively low land prices to surrounding counties, relatively low home prices, and relatively low taxes to those areas, and overall that leads to quality of life issue. Really.
Since Commissioner Kuhn went first, we gave him a waiver and let him read all of his drivers. Others, I'm going to ask you for one, and the way this works too is if you hear something that someone else said, no need to repeat it. And he may have covered it. I don't think so, but just check that off. We'll just bring up new items. So the other ground rule is look at what Michelle has up here. If you think it's captured incorrectly or you'd like to reflect it differently, let that be known too.
The only thing I would add to Mike's comment is that I think this made it easier for us to get engaged in this process because this growth has been so, in front of everybody, even people, in the bleachers of life, they're just sitting back and work-a-day world. They're like, what's going on here in Lebanon with all these, and the fact that there's always this clamoring and exchanging of employees because there's not enough employees to fill the demand created by these warehouses and so on. A lot of it's high tech and so on, but that I think the general public gets it, and so it makes it easy for them to understand why we would be engaged in these processes.
And that may speak to a lot of opportunity for comprehensive planning at this time. Yep. Commissioner Litz, did you have any other drivers that haven't been mentioned?
I do.
Okay.
Along the lines of growth, one of the causes that I see as a significant driver of growth is the Mason-Dixon dilemma, where it started in Adams and Franklin and York and Lancaster, and they saw this explosive growth. The prices of their land, etc., increased dramatically. As that happened, people thought, well, what's another half-hour drive from North Cornwall area? And so this Mason-Dixon dilemma is a driver of growth in our community. I also see...
You got one, but we're going to give you a break as a long-standing commissioner. Go ahead, give one more driver of change.
Only one?
Well, you're going to get to share your others, but
okay.
For now, give us one more now.
What's driving change?
What's
now,
driving
you didn't
change?
say what's driving growth, what's driving change.
And growth is part of change.
Okay.
What's presently driving change in Lebanon County?
Boy, it's hard to put these in any specific order, but along with that growth, I'm going to say the preservation of farmland. We have recently been able to work with federal dollars to bring in hopefully all these additional dollars, and also Audubon Society, the Gap, and different ones are putting in a pool of money that we can use to add to the pot we get from the county and the municipalities. And within 5 years, there were, a month or so ago, 36 farms on the preservation list. Now there's 26. We're really making strides. Within 5 years, if no one else applied, we'd wipe out that list. But there are 6 in the works since we announced this. So I don't know how many more will come. And I guess, how do we keep this going, and will we come to a point where no willing farmer, because it has to be a willing farmer, wants to preserve theirs? And initially we were trying to preserve only the top soils in the 500-acre clusters. But now We're also being told that it is important for the flyways for our largest employer, for Indiantown Gap, and the birds and everything else. So on the northern end, those farms too are considered for this preservation. They're not necessarily going to stay at the bottom of the list forever. They still have to follow our plans that are established by the Farmland Preservation Board. But all these are drivers in what's going on. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is there is some conflict between the developers and the farmers. And we need to be able to facilitate in an intelligent and thoughtful and caring way so that they are both accommodated.
Excellent.
Am
Thank
I
you.
making that
You
point?
are,
Okay.
and you are indeed, and we'll get into some of those outcomes. That was a good expression of an outcome. Others, just go ahead and help us round out the list of drivers. Something you haven't heard said yet. Just jump in.
I would add
Jamie.
demand for services by the public. We have a lot, and this is not just only in Lebanon County, but a lot of people say government should be smaller until there's something they want government to do. Yeah. So, if there's a child abuse case in the news, then suddenly there's a focus on CYS and why aren't they doing more, for example, and the same with, I think the same happens in development and zoning and so on, that, I like my neighborhood until something's here. Now, why doesn't the government stop this? Why don't my supervisors stop this? So I think there's a demand ironically, for more from government lately, even though that may not be what you hear.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Others? Jeff or John?
I'd say keep changing in technology, because to the points that Commissioner Kuhn and Commissioner Litz made is, how people can work and live now post-COVID. People can remote in where they choose to live, gives them a lot more flexibility. I think on the transportation side, the technology, the advent of autonomous vehicles and a lot of these things that are changing the dynamic of how some of these places are. So I think it's driving a lot of those other factors as well.
Good addition, indeed. Other drivers have changed from those who have participated?
Sort of building on that data, just better data, more data. Speaking as a planner, we always would say, years ago, we'd say, oh, if we had better data, we had more data, we could do so many more things. And they've sort of called our bluff now. We now have all of this data, and it's trying to figure out what can we actually do with it, what's it actually going to tell us. So I think thinking back about the planet itself, we have all these tools, but we need to figure out which are the ones that are going to help tell the story that serves the county in 2035 and 2050, whatever the out year is.
Thank you.
Demand for amenities like restaurants and shopping and all that, which has been putting stress on our infrastructure and showing us where our plans are not quite healthy enough to sustain where things should be or where they shouldn't be.
I'm gonna call that retail amenities versus like trees along the street. Sometimes that's the framework of amenities, but,
Okay.
I would say,
Susan?
what we heard in the room so far was growth. I think growth is on everybody's mind, and that comes when you have a healthy economy. Besides from COVID, our economy's been pretty healthy for years, being in Lebanon County, our location to the market draws that attention to our area more, and the need for product. So I think moving away from the real estate aspect of it would be the need for housing, that driving change, and then that desire for opportunities. Our residents living here, they want more options for restaurants, they want more options for open space, activities.
So demand for those kinds of amenities, use the broader term of amenities. Let's move over.
and I would just to add, to piggyback a little bit, and I really want to listen more than talk.
Go
but
jump in.
on the housing side, I think affordability on the housing side is key to Lebanon County as well.
We could come back, and this will be iterative. So, is there anything on your cards that hasn't come out for change drivers yet, Commissioner?
Yes, the air quality, especially this year, has changed dramatically, and that is something for the health and well-being of our community that we have to make sure we address what can be done. Processing of permits in a timely fashion is a problem, especially at the state level. They're not getting through, and I hear a lot of complaints that, you know, we're being held up, it's costing us some money. The U-Haul right on Cumberland Street is one example. They're waiting for their permit for a long, long time. And, you know, they run into all kinds of roadblocks. We do have to leave the door open because it's a public meeting. Thank you. And also the fact that we have windmills trying to locate where we have flyways for the gap and training. We have solar farms that have caused overcrowded rooms, and the other thing, also the engineers are being impacted with all of this back and forth, and I don't think they know which way to turn either. We just need to somehow coordinate with the state and make things run smoother.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jamie?
Somebody mentioned, one of the commissioners mentioned about job growth and job markets. Our proximity to larger job markets, the Dauphin, you know, Lancaster, et cetera, has caused a lot of residential development because we're a bedroom community on the edges. And I think that has caused a lot of development pressure because, as Commissioner Kuhn said, while affordable housing is an issue in Lebanon County, taxes and the cost of homes are different than they are across the line. You know? So I think that we've had residential development due to people wanting to work for higher salaries in neighboring counties but live in a lower cost.
Sounds like a significant change driver. I'm going to go over to the constraints for a minute, and we're talking about what's holding back change, what's standing in the way of change. And we'll start with Commissioner Kuhn again. He knows the drill now. He gives us one item that's constraining or holding back change.
Our current infrastructure.
You hear that frequently, that infrastructure is a constraint. Okay. Others?
Workforce issues, lack of enough skilled employment.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Workforce, lack of skilled employees. So it's a kind of a workforce deficit relative to the kind of jobs that you want to develop. Commissioner Litz?
With infrastructure, I don't want to interpret Commissioner Kuhn's, but if he was talking about roads and bridges.
Specific.
Yeah. I specifically would like to make sure that we don't forget our environment and our conservation end, because we have to think about water quality and quantity, and I mentioned air quality before. So these are things holding change back in some instances. Do we have enough water supply? And I know I reread a book put out recently by the Water Authority, and they're saying they can double our water. And so I think we we need to hear more from them about, is that reality? Because years ago they were saying with growth we would run out of water. So what has changed? What conservation things can homeowners do? What can businesses do to make sure that we can make sure we don't run out of water in times of drought?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Others? Jamie?
I think this may sound like I'm just blaming social media, but not entirely, but I think communication and misinformation, lack of communication. I think these days it seems that simply the transaction of a property from one owner to another will set off a whole set of assumptions that people, oh, I know what's going in there and I'm opposed to it. But nothing's even been proposed yet. So municipalities, particularly elected officials in municipalities, are faced with that onslaught of opposition before anything even happens, and that's hard to, they react, and sometimes maybe better information or maybe not such a quick jump to conclusions might.
I don't know if virality is a word, but when things go viral, is kind of what you're alluding to. So, well, that's what we'll call it for today.
You may have invented it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that speaks to why this ends up on the list, that even as we look at implementation, the tradition of comprehensive plans sitting on the shelf should go away. There should be a tradition of how do we share information and exchange information more on an ongoing basis, if not somewhat real time in some areas. So that's a good insight. Others? What's holding back change?
Tying that together, I had lack of municipal cooperation. I know we ran into that in the LRTP process for
Okay.
You know, one
So-
community views their sort of fiefdom differently than the adjacent community.
Thank you, Steve.
That's what I was gonna mention about the municipalities, I think being siloed and working individually, and that there's so many outdated zoning ordinances, you know, and that can constrain, the whole development process. And just having, maybe eliminate some of those silos and having the townships and the municipalities work better together.
Anything else holding back change that's on your list?
Funding. Sorry.
I know,
It's
no,
here.
take it.
Funding, or lack of funding.
Okay.
Well, and I think to dovetail on Steve's is going back to his point earlier about the amount of data that's out there. And then kind of line up with funding, the ability to pursue funding is you have to have the staffing resources. And Keith, you and I were talking about going after, there's a lot of new sources of money. And I think when I look at the county and I look at, you know, our program through the MPO, there are a lot of things that we could be pursuing, but we simply can't because we only have so many bodies to be able to do it.
That's a constraint we're hearing much more about. Capacity. Capacity, yes.
Excuse me, Jonathan, what was the end of your sentence there? We don't have what?
The number of bodies to be able to.
Okay. Wasn't sure how you were phrasing that.
Okay. Anything else on the constraint side? Anything on your list? Holding back change. If not, that's okay. Let's shift to another topic here. We'll move through these fairly quickly. I'm gonna ask you one right here about critical outcomes, and we're gonna do this in a different way. Did Michelle give you one card or more?
I have two.
Okay, so does everybody still have a fresh second card, or do you need a card refresh? Okay. This one I'm going to ask you to really constrain. You need another one, Jamie, another card?
No.
Okay. I want you to think about when this comprehensive plan is completed and it's being implemented. Critical outcomes. Critical outcomes. So you could write that on top of the card. We might collect them that way. What should the outcomes of this comprehensive plan implemented be? These could be outcomes 5 years out, 10 years out. It could be an outcome that occurs the day the plan is completed. Well, I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to try to give too many examples. That one of the critical outcomes of the planning process is that there is a high degree of awareness and consensus on the direction. But I don't want to narrow this down too much. Just think about outcomes and don't overthink it. What are the critical outcomes? If you were being interviewed by the media tomorrow and they said, well, what do you want to result from the Lebanon County Comprehensive Plan? And I'm looking for short answers here. What we're going to do is called affinity group these. We're going to get a long list and we're going to put them into some groupings. And that groupings of outcomes is going to help direct a lot of the plan activity. So take a minute or two and think about that. Critical outcomes. You're riding that elevator and somebody says, well, what do you want to result from the Lebanon County Comprehensive Plan? What would your short list be? Try to keep your answers to few words because we're going to capture it that way. Probably most of you have heard the old technique. It's not an old technique because it's actually not done enough, and that's working backward. Working from the outcomes is how do you get to those outcomes? And that's often been missing as an ingredient of planning. One of the things planners have sometimes done wrong is spend lots and lots of time collecting and analyzing data with very little perspective on what are the outcomes, what are we really trying to achieve. Commissioner Litz, do you want to give us the first outcome?
Well, yes. What I've heard is, and one of the reasons I was pushing so hard to get a new comprehensive plan or update, whatever you want to call it, is that the municipalities were starting to implement their comprehensive plans, which is wonderful because they were ahead of us. And I thought the tail shouldn't wag the dog. We should be putting this vision out there first. But because some are done or almost done, I think it's important, and I know you wanted a short answer, but to try and at least regionally ask if the municipalities could work together so that they can produce something that would be, because our county planning implements the zoning ordinances and et cetera for them. that they together could have a vision with consistent zoning ordinances of some sort, that everyone isn't different. I don't know if that's even possible.
Okay.
I'm not saying make it a countywide, but by region, almost like school districts. That might be a great thing.
Sounds like municipal consistency
Yes.
around a regional vision.
Yeah,
something like
because their land is similar in different areas. and
Excellent. Good start.
I think that's what
Commissioner
I'd like
Phillips?
to see.
Controlled growth, I think, is the overriding thing for me, at least what I hear.
that. Excellent. Commissioner Kuhn?
Said a different way, just protect and preserve public safety and quality of life we enjoy.
After the commissioners, I make it kind of open season, just jump in. Outcomes, you're riding that elevator, someone says, what should result?
I kind of said sort of the same thing as Commissioner Phillips, smart growth. So development in areas that already has the infrastructure, not out in a rural area that has nothing set up, no utilities or anything there, and focus on conserving those areas for environmental purposes and recreation and things like that. Just a little bit more uniform across the board as to where, that goes along with zoning also, as to where development should occur.
Okay. And you are Jamie, correct? Jamie. Thank you, Jamie. Okay. A few people moved and it threw me off. That was intended. Okay. Other outcomes.
Affordable housing for workforce capacity, workforce development.
And
that's the biggest, I think one of the biggest challenges some of the large employers face is that they can hire people, but they have to come from somewhere else who can't afford to live here.
Excellent.
I don't know, I'm gonna say this, and there's more that goes into it, but just like maintaining Lebanon County's identity, where we have growth, but yet we're still Lebanon, and we don't turn into Lancaster, we don't turn into Dolphin, but we're still Lebanon. I don't know.
You know exactly
how
what
to
you mean.
say, how to say that, but
Maintaining your identity, what makes Lebanon County special, right?
Right, but also, understand we do need to, growth and all of that, but just not getting too big for our britches, I guess. I don't know.
I think a part of that is supporting local businesses, not becoming completely commercialized, and because that's what we see in a lot of the more populated towns. And giving more support to local businesses.
Is it pronounced Sherry? Is that
Cherie.
Cherie? What you said underscores an important point. A plan should be something that brings the values in as well. So if an abiding value, and we didn't put values down here, but that is something to come to grips with in the planning process, is what does Lebanon County value? And we could talk, we're not beholden to the agenda, we could talk about values, but if one of those values is keeping Lebanon County what it is, the things that make it special, that should be very much central to the plan, not something put aside just to be addressing growth, for example. Excellent point.
We want the Lebanon area fair to look the same in 10 years as it does today. We have our.
Other outcomes that you have noted that we do not have listed?
They're in black.
Yeah, I'm sorry, back there. Yeah.
Okay.
I think maybe just to sum some of that stuff up is just finding what is that balance? What's the good balance for us?
Okay. So balanced growth and okay. On this one, on the outcomes, I'm going to ask Michelle, who's doing all the hard work here, if she'd summarize them here. Just Michelle, go over those. I don't mean that you have to write an essay, but if, just read those back. These outcomes, and as she does, listen well. What's missing? Outcome-based planning is real important. That we start with the outcomes, we work backward from them.
Okay. Assess regional willingness to work together. Have a bigger vision than yourself, and act upon that. Sort of think locally, think regionally, act locally. That mantra comes back. Control growth, manage where it happens. Infrastructure, served areas were mentioned. Protect and preserve public safety. Workforce affordable housing for Lebanon County's employers. Maintain identity, and sort of balanced growth change. As Julie mentioned.
Thank you. Any additions? It's a good
I think
starting
just
list.
the strategic priorities that you have buy-in, so it can make it a very successful plan.
I'll get you the next coffee. That was great. Yeah, I think the way to do any really good plan is, we haven't talked about it yet, is to really get to a short list of priorities. What is it we're really focused on? And this process, by the way, is a important step in terms of getting to a short list of what are our strategic priorities. So the comprehensive plan is really organized around some strategic priorities. Okay, excellent. All right, it's a good list. I'm going to take you somewhere else on this list, and I think we're still using cards, or we don't have to. No, we don't have to use cards for this. Michelle, if you could, this one, line across and a vertical line down. And I'm going to ask you to think about success and failure. She's doing the hangman thing. Here's the question. We don't have to use cards. If you need something to write on, we have plenty more cards we can give you. I'm going to ask you to think about this for a minute. And then there's only one ground rule here: absolute candor. Absolutely, you're used to absolute candor, aren't you? This plan will succeed if. This plan will fail if. Think about that. This plan will succeed if, fill in the blank. This plan will fail if. And we may start with the failure side, but we don't. We may just go back and forth on that a little bit. If you're a lifelong Philadelphia sports fan like I am, you're used to the failure side of the ledger.
Keith, are you talking more about sort of the process?
It could be both. I don't want to limit it. That when you think about the plan, it will succeed if, it will fail if, and some of these may be complementary. Jump in. Staff and others to jump in first here.
If we work together, it will succeed.
I was going to say, if we include all stakeholders in the process, that to me is vital.
Absolutely.
If we can't get consensus, it will fail.
Well, and I think making sure it's transparent, making sure people feel ownership over the plan will lead to its success.
A unified vision.
Unified vision on the success side, of course. Excellent. The stakeholder piece, by the way, also is a way of galvanizing resources. The traditional way is to look at a comprehensive plan is what does government do? But if you want to be innovative, you look for all stakeholders. What's their role in bringing this vision together and then implementing it? Excellent. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
I don't recall what I said.
Unified.
Unified, yes.
Okay. And we could go back and forth a little bit. How about failure? What's going to cause this plan to fail? Either in its development or its execution.
Predisposition.
Predisposition.
Predisposed views of what ought to be and where it ought to be.
And even a narrow view of what a plan should be.
Yeah.
Unflexible.
Okay.
I think the plan will fail if we don't have buy-in from the municipality. So I really stress that in order to really look at the smart growth in Lebanon County, we have to have buy-in from all the municipalities and leaders and bring them together and have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And the lack of that municipal buy-in, there's an example of a failure factor that could translate immediately into a planning strategy in terms of how we involve the municipalities. That's what we try to do with these, is how do you operationalize them. Anything else on the failure side?
I think if the requisite resources aren't brought to bear to move forward with implementation. Okay. I guess that's just not only what's already presently available, but what are some of those other resources that we can tap into or pursue.
Okay.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And ultimately, the implementation plan needs to be tied to the resources you have. Planning's pretty easy when it's a wish list. The hard work is the implementation. That's the hard work.
I think it's inflexible. I mean, this idea of like a living plan, it needs to be able to evolve as it, every 5 years, 3 years, whatever time you want to set. If it's inflexible, at some point the document will just be updated and be unusable.
I think the success too is if we focus on a lot of the positives that we already have and then figure out ways to enhance.
Excellent. Building on the positives. And that's in strategic planning when we do things like a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths that we can leverage to address an opportunity? So yeah, building on the positives, building on our assets. That's an excellent area of potential success factors that we've built on those assets. You've really all got the hang of this real well. So we're talking success, we're talking failure. We'll put this together in kind of a matrix that talks about what do you do, what are some of the initial thinking as to what do you do to enhance the success factors, what are we going to do to prevent or mitigate some of the failure factors.
One more on failure, I think, is too large. If the plan tries to accomplish everything,
yeah, then
what do you really focus on? It's hard to do.
Give him a hand. You got one person applauding. See, that's the Philadelphia sports fan. But
start throwing batteries at you at some point.
Your point, yeah, your point also gets to the point that was made about having a few strategic priorities. That's one of the really early activities, is to get down to, and we could do that around a lot of these issues to get to what are our critical priorities. Okay. Anything else under success or failure? You know when people will talk most candidly about failure? At the start, like this, at the beginning. Try to get people to talk about failure when you're 3 or 4 months into an initiative, people clam up. So there should be a lot of openness and willingness to talk about failure so that we can avoid it.
Well, I think a part of the failure would be not listening to everyone, because we have so many new people to this community, and where they came from, things are done totally different. It doesn't mean it was right, but they have to, both sides, the traditional Pennsylvania Dutchmen, so to speak, and the new people to our area must respect each other and be able to talk to each other without losing their temper, without trying to control, and all those kinds of things. It would be a failure if people could not listen to each other and come to consensus.
Excellent. And if we're able to model that, we'll give an example to the whole country, because that's what's very much is needed right now. And it's doable. It's doable to bring people together. You just have to cut through certain things to do that. Excellent list. Anything else? Success or failure? Okay. I'm being very selective, jumping around here. I would like to make sure we at least get some of your initial thought on number 5, envisioning 2035. If you get some cards out to you on that, I just want you to write 2035 on the top of it, and just put down a few words or phrases. What should Lebanon County be like in 2035? There's a little overlap with some of these items. Keep your answers brief. This is a very practical exercise. It sounds real broad. One of the ways we work with visioning is, instead of having a group sit in front of a whiteboard and come up with some poetic vision statement, it's to break it down into the elements. What are those elements that make up a vision? So write 2035 on your card. It's not as far off as you might think. And what should Lebanon County be like? What's the Lebanon County that you envision in 2035? Brief responses, please.
If you can remember 2011, it's not that far off.
It's a good way of looking at it, Jared. It's a good way to look at it.
I would say keep agriculture number 1.
Oh, that's what I was, well, it's still the source of food for America.
2035, the first thing we've heard, write down your items here. We may collect this one. And the commissioners will put a C, a copyright sign on their card. Agriculture is still prominent. Okay.
I think controlled traffic.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to end up being like Lancaster and be backed up for 3 hours.
Okay. Controlled traffic or mobility.
I think that we have adequate parks and trails so people can still get outdoors, that we don't develop everything. I mean, the rail trail is so close to being done. We have the Swatara Water Trail, but we need to protect these things and make sure that they are available for the future generations, not let others disrupt that somehow.
All right.
Commissioner? Preserve what we have, and that is, I believe, an attractive place to live, work, and raise a family.
Okay. Preserving the county's assets or strengths. Okay. give you a few minutes on this one because I'm going to give you a real tough one next. That's real important. $2035. Others?
Again, making sure we have adequate water supply. We are not a nomadic community. Whatever we build, we have to be able to support and sustain.
Okay. Anything else? So what we have so far for potential vision elements for 2035, we'll put some words to these after today, is that agriculture is still a mainstay, that there is good traffic flow, traffic conditions. Sustainable development, water supply, attractive place to live. Anything else as you picture 2035? Anything about your people, the people about Lebanon County? We can look at this from different angles.
Yeah. I'd be a class 4 county by then. Which will have ripples.
Sorry.
Something we experience, that Pennsylvania experiences in general, is a brain drain of the younger people graduating and with skills and talents and looking for high-paying, high-skilled jobs and don't find them here.
Retention of young adults, retention of youth. Yeah, I'm surprised not even hearing that yet. Thanks for putting that out there. There's a people side to it too. Plans are not just about infrastructure. There's a huge people ingredient.
And that our job market keeps growing with opportunities to have better wages. Instead of attracting all this distribution, that middle wages, that we should be able to be attracting technology and, healthcare.
I think we also need to make sure that we have adequate broadband or whatever it is in 2035, but the technology so people can communicate, because to take pressure off of the roads, many places are conducting business over the internet, and even the medical doctors are using the internet. So we were talking about broadband just a few meetings ago, but we make sure that's implemented.
Susan, anything else from an economic standpoint when you think about 2035?
Our military has to be always on the ready, and we want to make sure that if the BRAC Commission comes here, that we're ready with a good defense for those who are protecting us in the field and who are our warriors and really fighting for us around the world. We have to continue to support them.
Military presence still being in place.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. We're ready to shift gears. I'm going to give you a real challenge here. This is the ingredient that's often missing in public sector planning, and that's leadership. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction here. There are sometimes plans that occur for compliance reasons. An agency may require that a certain jurisdiction do a plan. And essentially the plan gets done for compliance. It's never really on the radar of leadership like it is today. This is a significant meeting from the standpoint of the plan being on leadership's radar. The broad question I'm going to encourage everyone to participate in is how can we really, these are specifics for the plan development. We're not talking about outcomes here. In developing the plan, what are some of the ways that we might be able to really make a big leadership difference? For example, what are some of the ideas for involving the private sector, for involving leadership in education, leadership at all levels and all sectors? This is not a brainstorm. This is just an open discussion, a strategic discussion about what can be done well, what can be done in an enlightened way to really put a strong leadership stamp on this plan. And it may start with things as basic as making people aware of it, but I'm going to just open that up to your ideas, and I'm going to challenge everyone to making sure that one of the things we say when this is done is part of its success was that it really did have a big leadership imprint on it. How do we do that?
I think we need to continue something that we've been doing, and that is meeting with the municipalities on an annual basis. they share with us, and they usually ask us to share with them. Each commissioner usually gets, I don't know if it's 5 minutes, but something of that nature. And at times, we have staff come in, like John Fitzke or whoever it might be, Cherie. They come in and they also address. So that way, it's a face-to-face exchange of information where we can, you know, say what is being successful and what our vision is to continue forward, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I like that, Joe Allen, but I would say on a quarterly basis, you know,
I'm
have it
gonna-
more often. I like that idea, but maybe meet more often.
The observation.
And we compromised to twice a year because I think quarterly might be a little bit burdensome for the planners and, you know, the municipalities, I think, would lose interest after a couple.
Well, I contend that a lot of staff, we have the relationship with the municipalities and we're talking to them quite often. And we have points of contact when we have issues, we frequently have dialogue with them. So I know the staff is in contact and we have good relationships with our municipalities all the time. And I'm sure planning, I'm sure John, you can say the same, right?
And I appreciate that, but I want to make sure that I won't be in leadership in 2035. I want to make sure that those leaders are hearing what is going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
If there's not that verbal exchange of communication between all of us, it gets lost.
Yeah.
You can't get them to support you financially, or you can't get them to support you with new extra staff that's needed, whatever it is. It has to be for all the municipal leaders, the county commissioners. Staff is doing an excellent job. I don't want to dismiss or diminish that, but everyone needs to hear it at the same time in the same way, so someone isn't framing the message and changing what was the intent.
And part of all of that is also there's a lot of turnover. So I'll be with the county 20 years this month, and in that time, I've been working with the municipalities, you know, all the time. And there's sometimes there's change, and sometimes it's good change, and they are more engaging and more like coming to me for things that they should have been coming to me for, you know, a while. And then other times it's they just don't know. They're new and they just don't know what the expectations are. They don't know what they should be doing, or, you know, not necessarily in a functional way, but as far as engaging with us. So the turnover, if there's something, a precedent set with meeting regularly, then that helps in the education process with municipal turnover.
And I think there's also a need to sort of build an understanding of the value of like interagency, intermunicipal coordination, and even inter-county coordination. I mean, use the example of the freight plan that we're currently supporting the county on with the Eastern Pennsylvania Freight Alliance, and that's a group of 10 counties, you know, multiple MPOs that all came together and said, look, freight is a concern for all of us, and it, you know, doesn't end at the Lebanon County border, it doesn't end at the Lehigh County border, it's a collective regional issue. Those kind of partnerships are hugely important, especially when thinking about things like funding. You know, Federal Highways loves to see multiple government agencies come together and say, yeah, we're all working collectively. I think building that into this comprehensive plan as a way of saying to all the municipalities in the county, hey, you know, if you can get 2 or 3 municipalities to work together, it's a heck of a lot stronger than the 3 of you trying to grab for the same amount of money.
Well, and to your point, Jonathan does an excellent job of coordinating our municipalities and the county and the state. And I'm going to use DCNR as an example. We are delivering on time and what was promised. When we write our grants, to his funding point, we are successful where some other counties fail. We have to pass that formula on to the future leaders on how we have been so successful. And I think that blueprint needs to be written down and part of the comprehensive plan.
Well, and like to
Please.
compliment you 3, I would just like to say, as an example, that DCNR and other state agencies use is the rail trail is a perfect example
Yes.
of leadership that you guys have taken, because realistically, LVRT would not be able to cash flow multi-million-dollar projects that they've become now to get them, you know, out the door. So the fact that you take on that role and you let us do that is
It has been very successful, and I think we should hold that up as a banner for our county because others are jealous. And we always have plans ready to go. I mean, again, using transportation as an example, Jonathan will prioritize what our list is, and when other counties didn't spend their money, it goes back to PennDOT or whoever, and they reallocate that money. We have, you know, shovel-ready projects that we can feed them, and we're getting funded. You know, we have been very successful between former Tom Cote and Jonathan's leadership in the realm of transportation, which is a huge issue for this county.
Sure. Let me ask a few drill down questions on leadership. We're going to try to drain you on this one. How do we get the private sector aware and involved in this comprehensive plan? That doesn't happen much.
Make it financially in front of them that it's to their advantage to do it.
Chamber of Commerce, for example, would be a launching pad.
As well as
partner,
EDC.
you know. And back up again, just to add.
Yeah,
you
sure.
know, I think one of the key things in doing countywide is, I think back to the experiences I've had, it's about building trust, you know, with those others that you want, you are seeking cooperation with, and accessibility is part of it. We talked about the frequency of meetings. For the planning process, we talked about quarterly. I think it has to be even more frequent than that through the process and with those key stakeholders. But you know, again, I go back to 20 plus years ago when working for the hospital, and we did the community needs assessment that developed the Community Health Council of Lebanon. And the consultant, you know, who did these all over the country, you know, said, everybody knows you, everybody here. We are small enough, and it's an advantage here that get 20 or 30 key stakeholders, and they often know each other, and that they already trust. There's already a level of trust there, and let's, again, to just in the last few days, in anticipation of this, because it's high on our priority list right now, I've run into about 5 or 6 different municipal leaders saying, hey, we're approaching this, you know, what are your thoughts on this? And I'm already gathering input from them. I think that's key as we, you know, just do our day-to-day lives and interact and have those casual conversations and make them feel welcome, and their input is important. Key.
And that's such an important and differentiating point, that you're actually sounding boards, that you're involved. The traditional model of it being staff and consultants talking with people and leadership not really giving voice to the planning process, the plan development, that's a real risk and an area of weakness. Continue, so leadership as a sounding board, continued, you know, looking for opportunities for you to bring updates and engage people.
And a unified message. I think a unified message has to go out, and you said, how can we make awareness to the community? Well, right here we have 3 media sources who are excellent. And, you know, if we all come together and have that unified message and they help to spread the unified message, I think that could be a big asset too.
And it could be very unified messages at different points in the process, but continue to communicate that. Private sector, any other thoughts on involving the private sector, John?
I think a lot of times reaching out to the private sector, especially to explain to them some of these things, use the example of the rail trail, it's not only a recreational resource, but also an economic impact. If you have a builder who's looking to build and he says, hey, I have a connection to the trail, you know, his house is in the attractiveness of that development. Employers, Mike and I are both on the transit board, and you know, you talk about future transit connections, and you talk to folks like DHL in the development process. Can you build some of those things into your development to better support your ability to get people, you know, to their jobs? Commuter services program that we have in Pennsylvania for our South Central region in Berks County has been one that's an avenue to go directly to the employers and say, how do you retain staff by giving them van pulling, carpooling, helping them direct to those resources, giving them amenities that maybe they like to work if that's something that they want to do, you know, that's both, you know, economic, financial benefit to them. So I think there's a lot of avenues where they can see the value of what we're trying to do is to reach out to them and make that connection.
This doesn't commit you to anything, but can you envision any tactics like having a leadership forum during the plan's development where you bring leaders together from all different sectors, public, private, nonprofit,
Absolutely.
so maybe a leadership forum or forums along the way?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay.
Excuse me. What about public meetings? I know that can be a two-edged sword, and you might be opening a can of worms, but how better to gain, and I'm asking this question because will there be a public meetings for the public to come and sit down and put input into this plan?
Yeah, and in fact, it's even gone, public meetings have become kind of antiquated until social media. Sometimes a public meeting would bring 2 or 3 or 10 people out. Now what you're seeing more of is public meetings and social media as a way of getting the public involved.
With the hazard mitigation plan, one of the things that we saw that was successful was surveys that were available by the website, advertised through social media, and people felt more comfortable to fill out a survey. It's a lot more personal than showing up somewhere, and they were very good about filling out surveys to answer some, pointed, directed questions, but it was successful.
And both comments are bringing us closer to where we'll go next, which is stakeholder and public involvement. I'll ask a few wrap-up items on leadership. I'm a big believer in this not often getting enough attention and being one of the key factors in plans not really achieving their potential. What about succession? Are there opportunities? Are there young business professional organizations in Lebanon County that we can bring younger business people to the table?
Leadership Lebanon Valley.
Leadership Lebanon Valley.
Good crop of up and comers. Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, I didn't know if it was that. Okay.
Yeah, and we have a lot of Rotary civic organizations that allow the young people.
Anything else in leadership? Education.
Yeah, we definitely have, yes. We definitely have to tap into. We've got, obviously Lebanon Valley College, but we have the Career and Technology Center. I mean, there's definitely some avenues there that we need to have. Harrisburg Area Community College. So yeah, we have some definite resources there that will be important in the process for sure.
Yep.
And I just, when you talk about leadership, the plan, I think when people think of a comprehensive plan, they think of a document paper. I think of people. If you don't get the right people in place to work on this plan, it's not going to come to fruition. So it really is going to be about the people and getting involvement from all those resources that we have in the community.
Many comprehensive plans have overpromised, underperformed. You can overperform. You can really perform well.
Well, to Jamie's point about turnover, as people here, we just heard she won't be here in 2035, so,
Oh, you're gonna be here?
I'm not announcing that today, but the reality is the township supervisors and all the people that, might have been part of the original plan here, you gotta keep it in front of the new people coming in. It has to be part of their orientation so that, they can get on board with it and keep it going, because otherwise it'll just collect dust.
When we talked about municipal turnover, I threw the word educate after that because it almost feels like you're in a constant sort of frame of educating the new person coming in. You can't give them a full history, but you can start from today. Here's what you need to know 101.
But who would play that role? Who would be in that role to do that? You need a leader in that role so that you can keep educating.
Yeah, it comes back to resources and capacity. If it's about future development, planning is the realm in which that sits. So whether it's commissioners or planning staff who are interacting, that there's some just steady information on that available. Particularly like post-election, like there's it comes in waves, right? You occasionally have a special election, but there are sort of waves to a little bit predictable.
Okay. We're going to go to a topic that I can tell you're waiting for, and that's stakeholders and public engagement. We're going to go there. Give Michelle a chance to breathe a second and pick that up.
Breathing isn't necessary.
We're gonna do this in kind of a funnel fashion. We'll start with let's start with the stakeholders. And before you write anything, Michelle, if you could put on the top left sectors, on the top left sectors, and on the top right leadership. On the top right. So I'm bringing the leadership dimension in here a little bit. So what I'd like to do is start a list, a 2-column list as we look at individual sectors, who should be part of this planning process? What sectors? And then within that, I use leadership broadly, name some organizations that would, so we're going to create a list and we'll draw horizontal lines when we break it up. So what sector would you like to start with?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Thank you, Commissioner. So healthcare, Commissioner's teed it up for us. Over on the right, Michelle's going to bullet then who some of the leadership or participants might be for healthcare. It could be an organization, it could be an individual.
Tied to the community hospital here, or president of the hospital,
Okay. And this could be, yeah.
board member.
Okay. It could be individuals, organizations, just that we begin to map out a little bit this stakeholder strategy.
Obviously, the hospitals.
We have
Okay, but hospitals is a general term, like Wellspan is specific versus UPMC is an Anvil versus, you know, another entity. So, because ultimately, we're going to have to get to a name of an individual. So hospitals is a kind of a bigger bucket.
Okay, well, you named two of them, and also over. on
Patty
the-
Donnelly is the president of Wellspan Good Samaritan Hospital.
Okay.
On the south end, you also have Lancaster General. So
Yes.
there are 3 hospitals that I'm aware of in Lebanon County right now.
They are
Yeah.
healthcare
PG, Penn
facilities,
State.
they're
There's
not
only one
hospitals.
inpatient
Right.
hospital.
Just a clarification.
And we can get to the people later, but this gives us a better list to ask Julie to populate. Or we brainstorm.
Part of Wellspan. Do you have
Yes.
the
Yeah.
VA veterans
Yeah.
and part of
Oh, VA, a good addition there.
Yeah.
Yeah, VA.
Well, and Commissioner Kuhn mentioned the Health Council.
What is the Health Council, Julie?
It was formed about 25 years ago as a similar effort to say what are the unmet needs and brought in all sectors and leaders.
I think that's Nicole.
Are you looking for categories or specific?
No, we're going to go one category at a time, and then.
But within healthcare.
So within healthcare now, we're drilling down to who might those organizations be, or even individuals, individual leaders, because I can envision there being kind of a convocation, bringing together leaders from the different sectors and getting to the common priorities.
Would you include in healthcare, I mean, do you have in mind mental health, addiction, those types of, that's all under healthcare?
It's
then?
not what I have in mind, but I would endorse it extremely high. Yes, mental health organizations are critically important, yes. And,
I'll just add it as a general,
yeah.
and we can follow up later,
Yeah.
but it's an important question
It could
to ask.
include physician leadership and still a segment of the healthcare workers that really see the whole picture very well are social service people.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to another category, and you're going to see this get built out as kind of a stakeholder engagement map. Let's go with nonprofits. Did you want to add something under
I was
healthcare?
gonna say education, because.
We'll go to education next.
School district.
Well, let's do nonprofit here for a moment. Any nonprofits that,
London Valley Economic Development.
okay, Lebanon Valley Economic Development. Is that your organization?
Yeah.
Excellent.
United Way.
Mhm.
We also have nonprofits that are serving special interests. I mean, we have Lebanon Family Health, we have Sexual Assault Resource and Counseling Center, we have, I'm missing some, I know, but those kinds of organizations that, you know, they work on specific entity or topics within our community, and some of it's health, but they do a wonderful job.
Lebanon County Christian Ministry.
Yes, LCCM is a good one. And then there's caring coverage, but.
And if you put an FB next to that for faith-based, Michelle, I see a lot of strategic planning work I do, like with communities or organizations, that faith-based ends up on the sidelines. And sometimes that's, you know, faith-based organizations being inward looking and they need to connect with their community.
Amen.
Sometimes they're not invited.
Yeah, I think that would be a great addition. They do have like a council of church, the pastors all
A
get together.
ministerium or something like
Yeah.
that.
I don't know, Jubilee Ministries.
Jubilee is great with our prison, our jail. Yeah, those are all good.
Okay. Are we ready for education? Who would say they're not ready for education? That would be it.
Might just have to hold it.
Okay. So let's go to
We
education.
have 6 public school districts.
And domestic
and-
violence was one that wasn't in there.
A few private Christian schools.
Okay, so six
Lebanon
public
College.
schools, Commissioner?
Six
We're
public
just getting Michelle
districts,
caught
yeah.
up a little bit here.
I live here, I know this stuff.
And what did you say beyond the 6 public
Lebanon Valley
Christian
College,
schools.
HACC has a branch campus here, what it used to be, but
Okay.
still a presence. Some Christian schools, private Christian schools.
Lebanon County Career and Technology.
I have a CTC.
Is that the same as Career Links?
No.
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 It's the VOTEC.
Oh, okay. VOTEC or?
That's CTC.
That's
that's
CTC.
It's a
Yeah.
CTC, Career and Technology Center.
I don't know, would WEPA go under education or nonprofit? I think
Both.
education, yeah.
Which one?
WEPA, W-E-P-A. It's a,
Workforce training
workforce.
facility.
Advanced.
Okay.
And they're bilingual.
All right, let's go to another. And again, you're going to get a feeling that we're cutting you off or not. We're going to develop these as draft lists. It's going to be an iterative document that lists sectors, organizations. Ultimately, it'll have contacts, people who are invited if there is a leadership forum or something that brings people together, or just keeping them updated on the plan's progress. Let's go to the ubiquitous category, and I'll even start off. Public sector and municipalities would be a start. We've heard it over and over again. Public sector, municipalities, the transit authority, yeah, PennDOT,
Our state legislators.
excellent from a policy standpoint, excellent.
And our federal legislators. Both.
Which ones, Commissioner?
Federal.
Yes.
Yes, state and federal legislators. Not a bad idea to make them aware that Lebanon County is developing plans. Sometime bring them in as a speaker. It could help down the road if you're pursuing a grant.
For funding help, yeah.
Anything else, public sector? The municipalities, transit, Fort Indiantown Gap,
And the VA.
the county. Can you imagine walking out of the building today and we didn't include the county? I could just see that. I
Watermark.
forgot
Okay.
something. The county, yep. County governments, county government departments, yeah.
Where do we want to put career link under?
Yes, since I added workforce up
Education.
here.
Oh, you have workforce there. The utilities.
Excellent. Sure, a strong tie-in with development. Could even be its own category.
We have a situation, just to emphasize that, that was a great suggestion, did you make that? I've been told some of the businesses are waiting on permits and they can't get them. Or hookups, to utilities. Certain utilities are not, I don't know if they don't have the manpower, but they can't continue to develop because they're not responding with hookups.
So
I would
let's,
certainly say electric, water, sewer, make sure there's capacity for some of the growth that we make.
you're doing something here, you may not even see it yet, but so much work today is done stovepipe, silos, and people are wondering, why can't we solve problems? One of the ways to begin solving problems is to bring organizations together. Identify what are our shared priorities and get people motivated and centered around those shared priorities. That's what's possible here. That's what's doable. Michelle, did we miss any sectors or anyone else? So we have, working from the bottom, utilities, public sector, workforce, education.
We've heard from the commissioners about public safety. I think that's a segment worth making some list.
Yeah, under the transportation, we'll add Norfolk Southern. I've been pushing Norfolk Southern on something lately. So we'll get Norfolk Southern listed as part of our transportation.
Yeah, they should somehow get buy-in too, because that has been one of our stumbling blocks, using the rail trail again as an example, coming across Cumberland Street just east of 16th. It never happened because we couldn't have good communication. We really need to bring Norfolk Southern into the fold.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean this respectfully, I've worked with them for years and Conrail before them. They certainly have experience, this shouldn't get in the media, but certainly have had challenges, you know, with the East Palestine thing in Ohio. They're probably feeling a lot of pressure to connect more with communities.
It would be nice if we could establish that.
Yeah.
I think real estate developers, I just recently spoke at a conference, and they kept asking what's the appetite to rezone, so that they blacked out probably the whole county if you let them, so, but they want to know what the appetite is for that development, and without them at the table kind of knowing what our vision and being included in that, I think it could be beneficial to have that.
Okay. Excellent.
I was gonna say
Great.
Lebanon County.
There's a builders association.
Builders Association,
Yeah.
Realtors Association, you know, I think of other professionals too, even attorneys or, you know, physicians.
But what an innovative idea to bring developers together as part of the planning process rather than reacting to it later on. It's a great idea.
I'd say one of the things that I see up there with the police and fire is the critical situation with volunteerism in those areas that are so vital to public safety. So in the next 10 years, that's going to be a big light shown on those areas to try to figure out how to bring more into that. The generational support isn't there as it had been prior.
And what about the housing industry? Could you, like, representation for the housing industry?
Our Housing Redevelopment Authority.
Housing Redevelopment Authority and community homes.
Yeah, community homes would be another one.
Begin thinking about this as a puzzle where you're putting these pieces together and ultimately get one big picture of life.
In transportation, I put the Motor Trucking Association. That'll connect you with a lot of the freight folks that are a big part of what's going on.
And they have some chapters around the state. They probably have a central PA chapter, I would think.
And Michelle, I probably throw in airports. We have a lot of right now off of these airports. Some of them are starting to experience some of that growth pressure that they could.
Yeah.
Great start. What sectors? If you could just read the sectors off, Michelle, to make sure we haven't missed any big piece. The sectors are.
All right, so we have healthcare, nonprofit, including faith-based, education and workforce, public sector, utilities, public and private, safety, transportation, development.
Okay.
So not a new sector, but under healthcare, I don't think we mentioned nursing homes. We have a significant number of, you know, retirement communities and nursing homes.
Excellent. There will be some overlap between stakeholder engagement and public engagement. There's overlap, but they're different. I want to spend a little time on the public side, and we're going to have a little fun with this. We're going to have a contest, and I'm going to ask everybody to put their one or two best ideas for engaging and informing the public in this comprehensive plan, and then you three are going to be no longer commissioners, you're going to be judges, because you're going to take the ideas, including your own, and you're going to judge them. We're going to have people put a number. We'll get them up on the flip chart, but first what we're going to do is if we can get a card out for everyone, and you put your best ideas down for engaging and informing the public in this process. Just that broad question of how are we going to do our best by the public in developing this comprehensive plan. I'm going to ask everyone to jot down your ideas for that. Michelle and maybe others will capture the ideas, and then the commissioners are going to be asked to pick their 3 or 4 favorites from that list. They won't know who did it because we'll just number them. So they may say, I like numbers 3, 4, and 5. So there's no personal element in this. And they're involved too. They could get to pick their best ideas. Your best ideas, tactics, steps, strategies for making sure that the public is involved in this planning process in a meaningful way, that they're informed, that they're engaged, that they're aware, whatever it may be. We're not limiting this. How do we best connect with the public?
Keith,
So-
when you say public, can you define that?
Citizens, individuals, I would distinguish it from the stakeholders in terms of, and this is a generalization, the stakeholders being more organizational. So I'll give you a giveaway. One would be that we reach the citizens through our network of stakeholder organizations. So there are connections, but essentially the citizens and individual businesses of Lebanon County. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and don't share your answers yet, Michelle. You're going to number these instead of bullet them, because the commissioners are going to put their hats on as judges, and they're going to pick. And there may be a lot of them. The other rule that applies here is if you've heard someone else say it, you strike it off your list. We won't have any repeats. And they're going to, Michelle, you notice, is putting these down, knowing that the answers are going to be brief. Or she's going to, even if you have a long idea, we're going to capture it in as few words as possible. Okay. All right. And I think they will know whose response is, so we can't separate out the personal part of this. But all right. Who would like to go first? Your idea. I may just call on someone. John? I've known John the longest.
My idea would be to develop a specific project website for the county company.
Project website. You'll notice Michelle gets that whole idea down in 2 words.
Where they can go for documents and updates, and at some point model it off of what the State Transportation Commission does with hosted online virtual town hall.
So we'll collect cards as well, so we get your chapter and verse on that too. Other ideas?
A story map.
You know, the visual thing is enormous. We're doing some work in grants now and can't begin to tell you how important visualization is. Story maps. Commissioners, you're invited.
Sure, I'd like to see some Facebook interaction, conversations, because that's immediate. Boy, people respond. And then also YouTube talks, you know, videotape some of the topics and, you know, go and have different ones that are experts in the field or whatever. And this is where you can get a business person and you can get a healthcare person and let them share that sort of thing, and do that through YouTube. We talked about doing surveys and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Julie mentioned Survey Monkey.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the wiki maps when we did the long range transportation plan. Those are really beneficial.
During COVID, we formed, we called it Forward Together Lebanon. Created the logo. That logo's still out there that we could gladly use for that. Yeah. And that created unified message, you know, so pitch the idea that we're all working together.
Sure. Logos, themes, you bet.
And then have a website that everyone can go to. So.
You know, the power of ideas, of logos and themes versus Lebanon County Comprehensive Plan. You know, that doesn't connect with anything.
Yeah.
More than steps.
Dovetailing off of, so the website, I think, is a good idea, and that's a good place to, if we implement some of these ideas, it's a good central place where people can engage with different things, links to different things. And then to dovetail on that, I would say maybe make a flyer with like a QR code or something that our stakeholders could take and put up in their place of business or whatever, because all of this is well and good, but it's not good if no one knows about it, or if no one is actually interacting and actually giving feedback.
And
so marketing the website.
You made a point there that I want to make sure we capture, and that's stakeholder network. Another place plans fail is to try to do everything through one organization or one consultant. Work through a network of stakeholder organizations to engage the public.
I think we missed a big one.
Can we have a stakeholder network, Michelle? Excuse me, Commissioner.
The media has been so good to us.
They were waiting, though.
And not to put them on top of the list, you know, that would be a big mistake. We have local media yet, and we should engage them.
That's another good way to
We're seeing some affirmative nods over there.
And I would add sort of visibility of local events, pop-up events, being present. but that sort of helps build that idea of ownership from the locals of the plan.
Good one. Okay. Let's get to 20. Not that that matters. Other ideas that haven't been voiced?
Just kind of summarize all this, but, you know, again, going back to my experience with the hospital and the community health needs assessment, which resulted in that community health council, it has to be multifaceted. You know, we did surveys, 10,000 surveys at that time was the number we settled on. We did 500 specifically in Spanish. So we need to remember that segment of our population is significant too. Another segment that is not as prevalent, but there's a strong plain community population in our county that, I don't know, when we talk about nonprofits, do we mention churches, you know, that just...
Yeah, I think we set up faith-based even as its own sector, or we included it, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they put, if we print them, they may put inserts in their bulletins, things of that nature, or even put it on their websites if we ask nicely.
I think the faith-based side has grown accustomed to not being asked to be involved in the public process.
Right.
And they need to be asked. They need to get out of the pews a little bit and be involved. And I think it's just been, again, it's indicative of people operating in silos. Okay. So I don't know if we'll get to 20, but were there any others on your list, your ideas?
Focus groups?
Couldn't hear it.
Focus groups was almost suggested. Can work very well. Could be a particular segment of the population that you want to drill down on.
Regularly scheduled municipal meetings, you know, making a point to make sure you sort of run the cycle of all the municipalities going to them rather than expecting them to come to you.
Yeah, I hope everybody heard that point. That is actually outreach to the municipalities. And that's a chance, of course, we're talking about public engagement here, and that's a chance to engage with the public through their municipalities. Excellent. Okay, and we about drained it, and I'm keeping a good eye on the clock. We won't go late, that's a promise. Commissioners, you have the hard work now of picking your top 3. Wow. Just jot them down by number, put them on a card.
See on.
Your top 3, just get a gauge here.